Isabella thought the worst part of her night would be being treated like an intruder and pushed out of the VIP area, but no one noticed, not even the security guards, the necklace swinging from her neck as she stumbled back. The man about to enter, the tycoon no one dares to face, froze the moment he saw it. He didn't come for drinks or the party. He came for that very necklace. And now, with his eyes locked on her, only one question races through your mind. Did he recognize her? Or is he about to reclaim something she never knew she carried? Isabella first noticed the temperature, not the air. Le Bernardin kept its climate at an invisible museum-perfect cool, but the thin, needling chill that slipped under her skin when the hostess's smile tightened by a millimeter, a pause over the reservation screen, a quick professional sweep of Isabella's dark hair, brown shoulders, borrowed black dress. The kind of pause that said, "I see you. I'm still deciding what to do with that." The dining room glowed like a jewelry box someone had forgotten to close. White tablecloth shone under warm, honeyed light. Glassware caught reflections like small moons. Conversations floated in low, expensive murmurs. Everything at Le Bernardin seemed tuned to a frequency made for other people. People who never checked menu prices twice. People whose lives didn't measure time in overtime hours and side gigs. Isabella's hands stayed relaxed on her clutch, but her fingers ached from holding it. They had insisted on tonight. "Promotion like yours? We're not celebrating at some noisy bar again," Lucia had said, refusing to hear objections. So they'd pooled cards, divided what they thought they could survive, booked a corner in the VIP lounge like it was a timeshare in another reality. Now the hostess led Isabella through the main dining room, heels tapping on polished wood, her reflection briefly ghosting past mirrored panels she almost didn't recognize. The VIP area rose slightly above the rest of the restaurant, a shallow platform framed in smoked glass and softer light. From below it looked like a separate world hovering over the main one. Same decor, different oxygen. The music there seemed quieter, as if money itself absorbed sound. As they stepped up, Isabella felt that familiar little split inside her. Part awe, part awareness of how easily spaces like this decided who belonged. Her friends were already seated at the curved banquette, half leaning over the table when they saw her. Finally, Lucia raised her hand, bracelets chiming softly. Diego slid over to make room, his jacket just slightly too tight for the setting. "Look at our corporate queen," he teased. "Next year she won't answer our texts from places like this." Their laughter came a little too loud, bright with nerves and defiance. As Isabella sat, the necklace settled against her collarbone with a small, familiar weight. She reached for it without thinking, thumb brushing the oval pendant once. A thin gold chain, no brand, no diamonds, just the softness of metal worn by years of skin. Her grandmother had pressed it into her palm in a hospital that smelled of bleach and boiled coffee. "So they don't erase you," she'd whispered. "So they remember whose blood you carry." Isabella had worn it on every exam day, every interview, every time life felt like a door she wasn't sure would open. Tonight it lay warm against her skin, catching faint glints of light when she turned. It looked modest in this room, humble next to watches that cost more than her student debt, but it anchored her. While Lucia chattered about work gossip, Isabella watched the lounge with the quiet precision she used at the office. From here she could see almost everything. Finance men in navy suits sank into leather, talking in numbers disguised as jokes. An older couple sat hip to hip at a corner table, hands nearly touching, the woman's pearls glowing softly under the lights. Staff moved like choreography. No wasted motion, no collisions, each person sensing the others without appearing to look. Isabella's brain cataloged the patterns automatically. Power sat here. Everyone else adjusted around it. Their waiter appeared with champagne, carrying the bottle as if it were fragile knowledge. "Congratulations are in order, I hear," he said, accent neutral, smile trained, but not unkind. His gaze slid around the table, pausing a breath longer on Isabella's brown face. Lucia's hoop earrings, Diego's off-the-rack blazer. Then it flicked to the pendant resting just above Isabella's neckline. For half a second, something sharpened in his eyes, then smoothed away. She almost dismissed it. Nerves made her see things sometimes, make meaning where there was only habit. He filled their glasses, recited tasting notes, disappeared. The ritual of it, all this ceremony over bubbles and fruit notes, felt like theater. Isabella let herself play along. She raised her glass, clinked gently with her friends, let the dryness fizz over her tongue. For a moment, the weight in her chest loosened. For a moment, she almost belonged. Food arrived in careful intervals, each dish a tiny composition on white porcelain. They joked about needing a slice of pizza afterward, about photographing everything like influencers and then pretending they'd been born into this. Underneath the banter, Isabella felt the old split widen. The part of her that loved flavor, texture, beauty, and the part that flinched at the invisible math, converting each bite into hours she'd worked behind a screen. Whenever the glass doors at the main entrance slid open, she felt it in the room. A slight adjustment in posture from the maître d', a sommelier's head turning as if drawn by a magnet. The staff never announced anyone, but the air announced them anyway. Some arrivals barely registered. Others shifted the restaurant's gravity half an inch. Isabella watched, fascinated, as if studying a galaxy that sorted stars by bank balance. She caught the first warning sign without realizing that's what it was. A woman at a nearby table, a narrow figure in a cream silk dress, diamonds at her ears like punctuation, glanced toward their group 3 times in as many minutes. Not long stares, nothing you could call out. Quick, precise glances that weighed and categorized. On the third one, the woman's mouth tugged just slightly downward, before she leaned toward her companion to murmur. Isabella knew that expression. She'd seen versions of it in elevators, in lobby security lines, in the slight coolness that sometimes followed the question, "And you're here to see?" Her shoulders tightened, and she forced them to relax. She adjusted her napkin, smiled at something Diego said, refused to turn and check whether the woman was still watching. Pretending not to notice was its own form of armor, her oldest practiced trick. The man in the charcoal suit arrived with an apology already prepared on his face. He wasn't a waiter. His jacket fit too well and a discreet earpiece nestled against his skin. A small pin glinted on his lapel. Security, but dressed in soft wool and policy language. He approached their table with that particular politeness reserved for people you're about to inconvenience while insisting you are not inconveniencing them at all tonight. "Good evening," he said, voice low enough not to disturb other tables. "I'm terribly sorry to interrupt your celebration. May I speak with you for just a moment?" His eyes landed on Isabella and stayed. Not on Diego, whose name was on the reservation, not on Lucia, who had confirmed it twice. On her, the one whose family name still made receptionists ask her to repeat it slowly on the phone. She felt her stomach hollow. Still, she managed a smile that felt like it belonged to a stranger. "Is there a problem?" she asked, keeping her tone even, professional. The tone that got her through conference calls where men mispronounced her name then asked if they could call her Izzy. Around them, the table fell very quiet. Lucia's hand slid toward Isabella's under the cloth, fingertips brushing her wrist in silent warning. "Nothing serious," the man assured. "There's just been a small misunderstanding regarding access to the VIP lounge. If you could step aside with me, we'll clear it up." The words were smooth as polished glass, but Isabella heard what sat underneath them. "You are under review." She rose carefully, the leather of the banquette sighing as she left. As she stepped down from the platform, the necklace swung forward, catching the light like a tiny, defiant signal. The security man guided her toward a quiet corner near the glass partition, where conversations from the dining room thinned into a distant, velvety hum. The lighting softened there, casting a muted glow across her face. Beautiful, composed, but holding tension like a wire pulled too tight. He positioned himself at a respectful angle, as if proximity alone might be mistaken for aggression, though the imbalance was already clear and absolute. "Again, Ms. Ruiz, correct?" he asked, though her name had been said clearly since she entered. She nodded once. His eyes flickered over the pendant resting against her collarbone. A subtle, reflexive glance he didn't seem aware he'd made. He cleared his throat softly. There was a concern raised by another guest regarding seating qualifications for the lounge. "We must ensure those spaces remain consistent with expectations." Isabella kept her hands folded in front of her, one thumb gently circling the other, a gesture small enough not to betray her agitation. "We made a reservation. It was confirmed twice," she said quietly. "If there was an issue, it should have been communicated before we were seated." The control in her voice startled even her. A thin thread of authority pulled from deep beneath humiliation's weight. He nodded, sympathetic but immovable. I understand completely. Unfortunately, we rely on tiered access markers and booking protocols, and occasionally discrepancies occur. Your table is welcome to stay in the main dining room. A comparable seat is already being arranged. I assure you it's still one of your most acceptable consolation prizes. She finished, her tone gentle but unmistakably sharp. The guard blinked, thrown off balance. Behind him, the restaurant continued in its seamless choreography, servers gliding, wine bottles tilting, conversations curving gracefully around theirs. But inside this moment, the world felt narrowed to a corridor of cold judgment and silent dismissal. She glanced back toward her friends through the glass. Lucia sat forward, tension wrapped around her spine, hands poised over her clutch as though preparing to bolt into action. Diego looked furious in that quiet way men sometimes did, jaw clenched as if holding back a dozen arguments he knew he wasn't allowed to make in a room like this. Their faces made something inside Isabella tighten further. "I have never caused trouble in this restaurant," she said, returning her gaze to the guard. "I'm not wearing anything inappropriate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break any rules." She tilted her chin a fraction. "So what exactly is the mistake here?" It wasn't a challenge, not fully, but a question carved with enough clarity that evasion would be obvious. A flicker passed through his expression, too fast to name. Guilt? Recognition? Resignation? He clasped his hands behind his back as if grounding himself. "These policies aren't personal," he replied. "We review all concerns with equal consideration, regardless of background or appearance." The assurance fell flat, a rehearsed line collapsing under the weight of reality between them. Isabella inhaled slowly, letting the breath steady her core. She felt the necklace warm against her skin, the pendant resting like a quiet heart. Her grandmother's voice lived somewhere inside it, a murmur of memory and resilience. She straightened, not aggressively, just enough to reclaim an inch of her dignity from the floor they had pushed her toward. "For what it's worth," the security man added, softer now, "your group can continue celebrating. Nothing prevents that. We simply need to maintain the lounge's standards." He hesitated, searching her face for understanding that wouldn't come. "I hope you'll accept the new seating arrangement." There was almost a plea in his tone, as if he wanted her cooperation to absolve him of the role he played tonight. Isabella didn't answer immediately. The pause stretched between them, not dramatic, not confrontational, but weighted with truth. She let herself feel the moment fully, the sting of being singled out, the quiet fury beneath her ribs, the ache of wanting joy on a night meant to honor her hard work, all of it braided together until it formed something steadier than anger. She finally exhaled. "I will return to my table," she said, voice calm but edged. "My friends deserve that much." She stepped past him, the movement gentle but decisive. As she walked back toward the lounge platform, her heels clicked softly, measured, unwavering. The guard remained in place for a moment, watching her with an expression torn between duty and regret. But the universe, or the room, at least, didn't intend for her to reach the table uninterrupted. As she approached the glass barrier, Lucia mouthed something she couldn't read. Her friend's eyes were no longer focused on her, but on something behind her, something approaching from the entrance with slow, deliberate purpose. Diego's posture shifted too, shoulders tensing, gaze sharpening. Isabella felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise before she even turned. A subtle hush fell across the lounge, spreading outward like ripples in liquid gold. The language of the restaurant changed, tones dropping, movements stilling, staff pausing with the kind of alertness reserved for seismic arrivals. A new presence had stepped into the current, altering its course instantly. She turned slightly, enough to look toward the main doors without drawing attention. The pendant moved with her, sliding warm and bright against her chest. In the moment before she saw him, she sensed the shift first, a gravity distinct from wealth, sharper than status, something magnetic, heavy with intent, crackled through the space. Then she saw him. The Tycoon, the one whose name occasionally appeared in news cycles, always surrounded by the aura of someone who didn't merely enter rooms. He changed their architecture. He crossed the threshold with precise fluid steps, quiet but commanding. Staff straightened instinctively. Conversations dipped into silence. Even the lighting seemed to respond. His gaze moved across the room with the slow, deliberate sweep of someone accustomed to choosing where attention should land and where it should not. And then, mid-step, he froze. Not dramatically, not with flourish. Just stillness, sharp and immediate. As if something essential had caught him by the throat. Isabella didn't understand at first, until his eyes lowered, specifically, inevitably, onto her necklace. The gold pendant glinted, reflecting the soft amber lights overhead. The Tycoon's entire posture shifted, just barely, but enough for any attentive eye to notice. And many eyes were now watching him and watching her, without knowing why. Her breath caught. A strange pull radiated between them, invisible but undeniable, as if the air had suddenly remembered some secret they were both supposed to know. The Tycoon's expression remained unreadable. Shock, recognition, disbelief, something far more dangerous. While his gaze stayed locked on the small oval resting against her skin, and at that moment, before anyone else in the room understood what was happening, the security guard at her back muttered something under his breath, half curse, half prayer, because he now understood what he had just done. The room shifted again, sharply, as the Tycoon began to move toward her with intent no one dared interrupt. The room seemed to contract around Isabella as the Tycoon advanced, each step measured, deliberate, almost unnervingly quiet for a man whose presence carried the weight of storms. Conversations around them clipped into sudden endings. Forks hovered mid-air. Even the lighting, warm, amber, elegant, appeared to shift, as if subtly adjusting itself to illuminate a single axis. Him moving forward, and her standing impossibly still. Her heartbeat stumbled, not in fear, but in the sharp recognition of being seen. His gaze never left the pendant resting at the center of her collarbone, not her face, not her posture, not even the security guard shifting nervously behind her. Only the necklace, as if the rest of the room were irrelevant noise compared to that small, gleaming oval of worn gold. For a bizarre heartbeat, Isabella wondered whether he even registered her as a person or merely as the carrier of something long lost. The guard took a cautious step backward, instinct overriding protocol. He looked like a man watching a fuse ignite after assuming it was just a stray wire. His jaw flexed, his hands curled at his sides. He didn't move to intervene, didn't reach for Isabella, didn't dare announce the scripted apology that hovered uselessly at the edge of his professionalism. The hierarchy had shifted, violently, and he understood it faster than anyone else in the room. When the Tycoon reached speaking distance, he stopped. Not abruptly, but with precision, as though stopping one step earlier or later would have disrupted some invisible calculation. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, carrying an aura of quiet authority. Yet his expression wasn't cold or dismissive. It was something far more dangerous. Recognition mixed with disbelief, softened by a strange, restrained ache. Isabella lifted her chin slightly, refusing to let herself shrink beneath the scrutiny of a man whose reputation spanned boardrooms and whispered political circles. Her voice, when it emerged, surprised her with its steadiness. "Is there something wrong?" she asked. Not defensive, not submissive, a question carved with the dignity she refused to surrender, no matter how loudly the room pulsed around them. The Tycoon didn't answer immediately. His eyes rose from the pendant to her face, slowly, as if adjusting to the realization that the jewelry wasn't suspended in empty space. When his gaze finally met hers, the intensity made the back of her neck warm. There was no hostility in his expression, only focus sharpened by memory and something deeper beneath it. The shock of encountering a ghost he never expected to see again. "That necklace," he said at last, voice pitched low enough to keep the moment contained between them. His tone held no accusation, only gravity. "Where did you get it?" The words were fragile with meaning, though she didn't yet understand why. Around them, the restaurant had gone eerily still. Patrons pretending not to listen, staff frozen in their stations, her friends tense shadows behind glass. Isabella's fingers hovered instinctively near the pendant before she caught herself and lowered her hand. "It belonged to my grandmother," she replied carefully. "She gave it to me before she passed." Even as she said it, her chest tightened, recalling her grandmother's frail grasp, her voice rough with truth she never fully explained. The Tycoon's reaction to the pendant pulled at threads Isabella hadn't realized were woven through her family's stories. The Tycoon exhaled, but the breath sounded like someone absorbing impact, not relief. For a moment, his composure wavered, subtle, but unmistakable. His eyes drifted back to the necklace as though confirming what his memory insisted was true. That piece, he murmured, almost to himself, should not exist. I thought it was lost decades ago. Then his gaze locked onto hers again, sharper now. Your grandmother, what was her name? Hearing the question sent a strange ripple through Isabella's ribs. Her grandmother had always been careful with details, with history, with names she refused to explain. Maria Inés Calderón, she said slowly, the syllables tumbling out like a secret finally spoken aloud. The Tycoon's posture shifted again, shoulders drawing back, expression tightening with a shock so restrained it looked almost physical. He repeated the name under his breath, each syllable falling like a stone into deep water. His eyes softened, then darkened with something close to grief. Calderón, he whispered, as if the word itself carried weight. He blinked once, long, slow. Of course it would be her, as if the revelation hurt, as if it confirmed something he'd both hoped and dreaded for years. The guard behind Isabella stood frozen, realizing trouble had multiplied. Isabella felt pressure build inside her, something between confusion and alarm. You knew her? She asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. The Tycoon studied her face again, not with the entitlement of power, but with the fragile caution of someone staring at the last surviving trace of a life he'd buried. The air around them thickened, each second drawing tighter, more loaded, more inexplicably intimate. She was... He stopped, jaw tightening, words rearranging behind his eyes. She was important. The understatement struck her like a blow. A flicker of memory. Her grandmother's stories half told, half hidden, her eyes clouding whenever certain names arose. A woman who carried secrets in the lines of her palms who once whispered, "Some truths protect you more when left sleeping." The restaurant around them had dissolved into background blur. Only the two of them remained in focus. A man unraveling a piece of his past, and a woman standing at the crossroads of a history she'd never been told. Isabella's pulse thrummed against her skin. Why does this necklace matter? She asked. The question landed between them like the crack of ice under pressure. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a half-step closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar near his temple, the fine lines carved by years of responsibility and loss. Because it was given to someone I once trusted more than anyone, he said softly, and because its disappearance changed the course of everything that came after. A truth too heavy to voice fully, yet too sharp to ignore. Before she could speak, a shift rippled through the room behind him. Staff members exchanged uneasy glances. A maitre d' approached cautiously, but stopped several feet away, waiting for permission to interrupt. The Tycoon didn't turn, didn't even acknowledge the presence behind him. His attention remained fixed on Isabella, as though he'd found something impossible and wasn't prepared to look away. Lucia appeared at the edge of the VIP platform, gripping the glass, eyes wide and flicking between the two of them. Her face carried silent questions. Are you okay? Who is he? Should I intervene? Isabella gave her a faint shake of the head. Not yet. Whatever this was, it was bigger than embarrassment or pride, something deeply connected to the pendant now warming anxiously against her skin. The Tycoon finally drew in a breath, steadying himself like a man preparing to open a sealed chapter. Your grandmother left abruptly, vanished according to everyone who knew her. No explanation, no goodbye, only rumors. His voice lowered further, almost painful in its honesty. I searched for years, with no trace. And now, his eyes moved again to the pendant. This appears around your neck. The word struck her chest with a thud. She never spoke of leaving anyone behind, Isabella whispered. She heard her own disbelief. Her grandmother had been her anchor. Private, yes, secretive at times, but loving, grounding. She couldn't reconcile that woman with the ghost the Tycoon described. Yet the pendant's presence between them felt too charged to ignore. A bridge between two lives she didn't know were connected. The Tycoon studied her with an almost unbearably human expression. "She protected you," he said. "That much is clear." The words held no accusation, only a sorrow so refined it felt like a polished artifact. He stepped back slightly, not retreating, but giving her space, as though the weight of the moment required room to breathe. "If she gave you that necklace, then she trusted you more than she trusted anyone else." Isabella felt the room tilt. Trust, protection, disappearance. The threads tangled faster than she could untangle them. "But why would she hide from you?" she asked, the question trembling on her tongue. She didn't fear him, not the way one feared powerful men. But she feared the implications of the story he carried, the shadow stretching from his past into her present. "What happened between you?" His silence lasted several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice held the kind of restraint found only in wounds tended too late. "There are truths that break the people who hold them," he said. "And there are truths that break everything else." His eyes lingered on the pendant. Memory, regret, longing folded into a single stare. She chose which world to shatter. Before she could respond, the maitre d' finally approached, wearing an expression balanced carefully between fear and professionalism. "Sir," he began, voice soft, "your table is ready. Shall I—" His words dissolved as the Tycoon lifted a single hand, stopping him cold. The gesture was non-aggressive, but it carried absolute authority. The maitre d' retreated immediately, barely breathing. The Tycoon turned back to Isabella. His voice lowered again, not soft, but intimate in a way that made her pulse catch. "I need to know one thing," he said. "When she gave you the pendant, did she say anything unusual? Any phrase? Any warning?" The urgency beneath the question was unmistakable. The guard behind her shifted again, sensing that the situation had slipped far beyond protocol. A memory fluttered inside her grandmother's final hours, the sterile hospital lights, the sound of monitors steadying and fading. She said, "So they don't forget who you are." The words escaped her in a whisper, trembling with emotion she didn't expect. "I always thought she meant the world. Or me. Or, I don't know." But now, standing before this man, they felt like coded truth. The Tycoon inhaled sharply. His composure thinned, revealing something raw, a history fracturing beneath his stillness. "No," he murmured, voice nearly breaking. "That wasn't about you." He swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the pendant. She meant them. The pronoun dropped like a blade through the air, slicing open a new, terrifying possibility Isabella hadn't even considered. The restaurant vibrated with tension, quiet, elegant, suffocating. The Tycoon straightened slightly, gathering himself. "I need to speak to you privately," he said. "Not here. Not in front of them." His eyes swept over the watching crowd, curiosity masquerading as politeness. "This is not a conversation meant for public rooms." Isabella's breath hitched, not in fear but in the dawning gravity of what her grandmother had hidden. She took a subtle step back, her fingers brushing the pendant as if for reassurance. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Why now?" The Tycoon held her gaze, the answer surfacing in his eyes before reaching his lips. A revelation sharp enough to reshape everything. But he didn't speak it. Not yet. Instead, his jaw tightened, and he looked past her shoulder, over at something or someone approaching with hurried, anxious steps. The micro-shift in his expression said everything. They weren't alone anymore. And whoever was coming for her. Isabella turned before she could stop herself. Instinct pulled tight inside her like a violin string bracing for the next note. A man in a dark gray suit, another member of the restaurant's security team, was striding toward them with urgency that broke the room's engineered calm. His steps were quick, nearly silent, but laced with purpose. His eyes weren't on the Tycoon. They were on Isabella, wide with something that looked dangerously close to alarm. The Tycoon noticed instantly. His posture shifted, shoulders straightening with the precision of a man who'd spent decades learning to detect threats before they materialized. He angled slightly toward her, instinctively placing himself between Isabella and the approaching guard. Not aggressively, but with a protective sharpness he didn't attempt to hide. "Stay behind me," he murmured, voice low, controlled, unquestionably authoritative. Isabella froze for half a heartbeat. Not because the command frightened her, but because hearing it, gentle, protective, urgent, sent a wave of confusion through her ribs. Why would a man like him care enough to shield her? Why would he act as if danger had followed her into this gilded room? The pendant at her chest felt almost hot, as if reacting to the shift in the air. The second guard reached them and stopped abruptly, breath unsteady. He glanced at the Tycoon, then at the first guard lingering behind Isabella, then finally at her again. "Sir," he said quickly, directing his words to the Tycoon, though his eyes kept flicking toward her. We need to speak. There's been an incident involving the guest who issued the complaint about this table." His Adam's apple bobbed. "She is requesting immediate escalation." The Tycoon's expression tightened. Annoyance, then caution, then something sharper. "Escalation," he repeated quietly, the word acquiring weight in his voice. "On what grounds?" The guard hesitated, caught between protocol and fear. "She claims," he said, choosing phrasing with careful neutrality, "that the young woman may be in possession of stolen property." His gaze dropped almost involuntarily to the necklace. Heat shot through Isabella's stomach. Anger, disbelief, humiliation, all rising at once. "Stolen?" she echoed, her voice cracking slightly before she steadied it. "This pendant has been in my family for generations." The Tycoon didn't take his eyes off the guard. His posture hardened, gravity deepening around him like a slow-forming storm. "Who made this claim?" he asked. The guard swallowed. "Mrs. Halden," he said. Recognition flashed across the Tycoon's eyes, a mixture of irritation and something resembling pity. Mrs. Halden, whoever she was, had clearly overstepped. She said she recognized the piece. The guard continued. Insisted it was identical to one that vanished years ago. She demanded we detain the guest until verification could be made. A hush seemed to sweep through the restaurant, subtle but unmistakable. The Tycoon stepped forward, the gesture quiet but arresting. "You will not detain her," he said, each word carved with authority so absolute it silenced air itself. "Not tonight. Not ever. And certainly not because Mrs. Halden feels threatened by a woman she believes does not belong in her line of sight." Isabella flinched, not from fear, but from the rawness of hearing her humiliation crystallized aloud. Still, the Tycoon's voice held no pity. Only truth sharpened by outrage he barely contained. He turned to her then, and though his expression remained controlled, there was fire behind his eyes, anger not at her, but for her. "No one touches you," he said softly, firmly, not because of ignorance, not because of jealousy, not because of lies. The first guard shifted, remorse carved across his features. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Sir, with respect, we didn't know." He gestured faintly toward Isabella's necklace. "We didn't recognize it." The Tycoon's gaze narrowed. "No," he replied, voice cold steel. "You didn't. But she did. And that's the problem." His attention flicked toward the VIP lounge where a thin woman in pearls was watching them with a stiffness that borderlined on fear. Mrs. Halden. She stood near her table, rigid, pale, her eyes fixed not on Isabella, but on the pendant, as if the sight of it dredged up something buried. Her husband tugged at her elbow, murmuring something, but she barely reacted. Her gaze flicked between the necklace and the Tycoon, and a faint tremor passed through her hand. Recognition, panic, something close to guilt. The Tycoon took a slow breath, steadying the air around them. "She knows exactly what that piece represents," he murmured, "and she never expected to see it again." Isabella's heartbeat hammered in her chest. "What does it represent?" she asked. "What is she afraid of?" The Tycoon met her eyes. Deep, unguarded, a truth powerful enough to unravel her entire life. Before she could speak, Mrs. Halden suddenly moved, stepping toward them with a sharp, trembling urgency. Her heels clicked across the wooden floor like tiny detonations, drawing the gaze of every patron. Her expression was caught between fury and terror, as though fighting a war inside her skull. "You," she hissed toward Isabella, voice cracking. "Where did you get that necklace? Who gave it to you?" The Tycoon stepped fully in front of Isabella now, blocking Mrs. Halden's advance with a single, deliberate shift of his body. "Stop," he said quietly. That one word froze her in place. Mrs. Halden's eyes widened, not at the command, but at the man issuing it. You, she whispered, breath trembling. You can't be here. Not tonight. Not because of... Her gaze snapped back to the pendant again. Every muscle in the Tycoon's jaw tightened. Maria Ines, he said softly, her grandmother's name sliding through the air like a memory cracked open. Mrs. Halden's face drained of color. Her fingers trembled at her side. Don't say that name, she pleaded, voice almost breaking. You don't understand what... Oh, I understand perfectly, he cut in. You were there. You remember what happened. You remember who vanished. And you remember why. Silence swallowed the room whole. A faint tremor passed through Mrs. Halden's shoulders. Her eyes flicked once more to Isabella, but this time her expression wasn't contempt. It was fear, bone deep, trembling fear. I didn't know she had a child. Mrs. Halden whispered. No one did. She disappeared before anyone could. Her voice fractured. Isabella felt the floor shift beneath her. Her grandmother. A disappearance. A child. A secret held hostage by time. The Tycoon stepped aside just enough that he and Isabella now stood shoulder to shoulder, united not by choice but by truth rising like a tide. Mrs. Halden shook her head violently. You have no idea what you're walking into, she said, pointing at Isabella with a trembling finger. You don't know what that necklace means. You don't know who will come for her once they realize. She stopped herself abruptly, eyes darting to the entrance as if expecting someone to appear. The Tycoon's voice dropped, dangerous in its calm. Mrs. Halden, he said, finish the sentence. She didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she took one step back, then another, her panic spreading like cracks across porcelain. You shouldn't have brought it back, she whispered. Some doors stay closed for a reason. The Tycoon turned to Isabella, eyes burning with urgency and something painfully close to protectiveness. We need to leave, he said. Right now. She stared at him, confused, terrified, anchored only by the heat of the pendant against her skin. Why? She asked. His answer came low, tense, irreversible. Because the people your grandmother fled from just learned you exist. The word struck Isabella like a physical blow, cracking through the fragile shell of composure she'd been holding together across the night. The people your grandmother fled from just learned you exist. The sentence vibrated through her bones, unraveling every memory she had of Maria Ines, every warm smile, every quiet warning, every gentle refusal to talk about her past. Suddenly, all those silences felt less like nostalgia and more like barricades. Around them, the restaurant seemed to shift further into an unnatural quiet. Diners pretended to resume their conversations, but their eyes lingered on the three figures at the center of the storm. Isabella, the Tycoon, and Mrs. Halden retreating with trembling disbelief. Even the staff moved differently now, cautious, uncertain, aware that something delicate and dangerous had cracked open in a room built to hide discomfort under linen and light. Isabella tried to speak, but air caught in her throat. Why would anyone be looking for me? She whispered. Her fingers curled around the pendant, gripping it as if the metal could anchor her. My grandmother wasn't dangerous. She was kind. Private, yes, but she wasn't running from anyone. The words tasted weak. Even to her, kindness did not erase danger. Privacy did not erase pursuit. The Tycoon watched her with an expression carved from grief and urgency. Your grandmother didn't disappear to protect herself, he said softly. She disappeared to protect what she carried and who she carried. His gaze traveled to the pendant, then to her face. That necklace wasn't a keepsake. It was a marker. A claim, his voice lowered further, and a threat to the people who feared what returning it would mean. Isabella's pulse hammered under her skin. Her mouth went dry. Claim? She repeated. Claim to what? The Tycoon hesitated, jaw tense, as though revealing the truth required navigating an emotional minefield. Power, he said simply. Legacy. Ownership of something your grandmother chose to hide rather than surrender to people who never deserved it. His voice trembled on the final word, betraying how personal the revelation was for him. Before she could speak again, the second guard shifted uncomfortably. Sir, If there's a security concern, we should escort you both to a private area or call for outside assistance. The Tycoon's gaze snapped to him. Sharp, composed, dangerous. You will not call anyone, he said. Not yet. Not until I assess exactly how much they know. The guard swallowed hard and stepped back, instinctively recognizing the chain of authority had shifted away from the restaurant entirely. Isabella's breath came unevenly. Please, she murmured. Someone tell me what's happening. The Tycoon took a slow step toward her, not closing in but offering gravity she could lean toward if she chose. Your grandmother and I were bound by something older than either of us, he said. Something she protected fiercely. Something my family failed to protect at all. Regret lined his features, shadows of a history he clearly carried like a wound. Mrs. Halden's voice suddenly cut back into the moment, thin, shaking, soaked with fear. You shouldn't do this, she whispered from a distance. She doesn't know what door she's standing in front of. The Tycoon didn't even turn toward her. She has every right to know, he said. More right than anyone in this room. Mrs. Halden shook her head violently, lips trembling. Right isn't the same as safety. The Tycoon looked back at Isabella. We need to leave this place, he said again, quieter now. Not because I think you're unsafe at this moment, but because conversations like this shouldn't happen while people who fear the truth are watching. His glance slid again toward Mrs. Halden, whose hands trembled as she clutched her husband's sleeve. And because eyes are already turning. Isabella hesitated, fighting the instinct to anchor herself to familiarity. Her friends were still behind the glass, wide-eyed and frozen, watching everything unfold without understanding the stakes. She turned toward them and tried to summon a reassuring expression, but her hands were shaking. Lucia mouthed, Are you okay? Diego stood, ready to intervene if she gave any sign of danger. She couldn't move to them. Not yet. I won't leave without telling them I'm all right, Isabella said, voice unsteady but firm. They're my family. The Tycoon nodded. Of course. But keep the explanation vague. The less they know now, the better. His words weren't dismissive. They were protective in a way that felt strangely grounding, as if he understood the danger in her becoming a target through association. She crossed toward the VIP platform, the Tycoon remaining a deliberate step behind her, shadowing without crowding. Her legs trembled, but her spine held straight. When she reached her friends, she forced a soft smile. Everything's fine, she lied gently. I just need to step outside for a moment. Diego's brows knitted. With him? She nodded. I'll explain later, I promise. Lucia touched her wrist, whispering, Be careful. Isabella rejoined the Tycoon, each step carrying a strange mix of fear and certainty. Like walking through fog but sensing a path beneath her feet. As they approached the main doors, the pendant warmed again, pulsing faintly against her skin. It felt almost alive, whispering threads of memory she didn't have the words to interpret. The Tycoon's eyes flicked to it, noticing the shift. It's reacting, he murmured. Just like before, she frowned. Before? He exhaled, long and controlled. Later. He guided her toward the exit, not with a hand on her back, not with pressure, but with presence, a gravitational pull leading them out of a room suddenly thick with surveillance. As they stepped through the doors, the night air brushed against them, cooler, sharper, carrying the hum of distant traffic and the glitter of city lights. Please tell me what you know, Isabella said once they were outside. All of it. Her voice cracked but didn't break. The Tycoon stood in front of her, silhouetted against the glow of Midtown Manhattan, eyes dark with memory. Your grandmother didn't just disappear, he said softly. She fled. She fled because she discovered something that threatened the people who controlled everything she stepped away from. The sidewalk quieted around them, as though the city itself leaned in. And you, he continued, are the first living proof that her secret didn't die with her. Isabella's breath caught. What secret? The Tycoon hesitated, choosing his next words with surgical care. A lineage, he said. A bloodline. A rightful claim to something that was stolen long before you were born. She felt her knees weaken. Claim to what? She whispered. The Tycoon looked at her, truly looked, as if seeing the outline of a future she didn't know existed. To everything they built their empire on, he said, because it was never theirs to begin with. Silence stretched, taut and electric. Isabella's fingers tightened around the pendant, What does that make me? She asked, voice barely audible. The Tycoon stepped closer, close enough that his presence steadied her breath. It makes you, he said, the one person they never wanted to exist. His eyes softened. Grief, awe, fear mixing in equal measure. And the only one with the power to expose everything they buried. Isabella swallowed hard. Her world tilted off its axis, not violently but with slow, devastating clarity. Destiny, legacy, danger, inheritance. It all swirled around her in a single pulse. She lifted her eyes to his. So what do I do now? The Tycoon didn't look away. We run, he said quietly, together. And then, we decide whether to open the door your grandmother died protecting. A figure stepped out of the shadows behind them, footsteps too deliberate to ignore. Watching, waiting, tracking. The Tycoon turned sharply. They were no longer alone. The SUV cutting away at the last second bothered the Tycoon more than if it had stayed glued to their bumper. Predators that followed openly wanted to intimidate. Predators that slipped sideways at the green light were thinking in maps, not streets, switching lanes in a game he knew far too well. His eyes stayed on the road ahead, but his mind was already tracing possibilities. Isabella kept watching the empty slice of street behind them, as if the vehicle might materialize again out of thin air. Nothing. Just headlights, taxis, a cyclist cutting between lanes with a kind of suicidal grace. They're really gone? She asked, not trusting what her eyes suggested. Her voice sounded strange to her, thinner, stretched. Mateo didn't turn. No one disappears that fast, he said. They're either circling, or they decided they got what they came for. He glanced at the side mirror, jaw tight. A recording of her getting into your car might have been all they needed tonight. Her stomach clenched. Of course. They wouldn't have to grab her. Just prove she was valuable to him. Attach her to his orbit, then use the connection like a wrench. So, I've already made it worse, she muttered, the words slipping out before she could swallow them. The Tycoon finally looked at her, his profile softening at the edges. You didn't make anything worse, he said. You just turned on a light in a room they preferred to keep dark. They were always going to come eventually. Now we get to see how they move. The phrase we sat between them like a promise she hadn't asked for but suddenly needed. Outside, the city shifted neighborhoods. Glass and chrome gave way to brick facades with fire escapes, stoops with chipped railings, bodegas lit in harsh fluorescence. The car dipped into streets that smelled less like perfume and more like fried food and damp concrete. Isabella watched familiar textures slide past. A world closer to the one she'd grown up in than the polished shell of Le Bernardin. Where are we going? She asked. The Tycoon's voice lost some of its corporate polish, revealing something rougher beneath. A place your grandmother insisted on owning, he said. She called it her neutral ground. My father called it a waste of capital. A faint ghost of a smile touched his mouth. She ignored him, obviously. They turned down a narrow block where the streetlights were softer, their glow dimmed by tree branches. The car rolled to a stop in front of a brownstone with peeling paint on the railings and a deep blue door that looked freshly touched up, like someone still cared enough to fight the weather. There were no security cameras, no doorman, no obvious signs of wealth. This is your safe house? Isabella asked, incredulous. This is hers, Mateo corrected, already scanning the sidewalks, the parked cars, the apartment windows above. He just pays the taxes. His eyes swept across the street one last time. Then he nodded to the driver. We're clear for now. Isabella stepped out of the car. The air carried the faint smell of rain and hot metal, undercut by something older, dust, brick, the tired sigh of an old building. Her heels clicked on the stone as she followed the Tycoon up the short stoop. Being here felt like walking into the shadow of a woman she loved, and yet clearly never fully knew. Last chance, he said quietly, fingers resting on the banister instead of her arm. You can tell me to take you home. I'll do it. We'll pretend tonight was nothing but a bizarre misunderstanding. He held her gaze. You'll still be in danger. You just won't understand why. She thought of her grandmother's hand pressing the pendant into hers, of all the unanswered questions she'd tucked away out of respect. Cowardice disguised as reverence. No more pretending, she said. If she carried this alone all that time, the least I can do is carry the truth. He nodded once like a pact had been sealed, and followed Mateo inside. The hallway smelled like old plaster and boiled coffee, the kind of scent that never fully leaves a building no matter how many years pass. Tile floors, faded and cracked, led to a stairwell with a banister worn smooth by countless hands. As they climbed, every step echoed with a strange familiarity, as if the walls remembered a softer set of footsteps decades ago. On the second floor, another blue door waited. This one had a simple brass number, polished, but not new. Mateo worked the lock with practiced ease. The mechanism clicked, then yielded. He pushed the door open and stood aside. The apartment felt like stepping into a held breath. Warm lamplight bathed the room in soft gold. Wooden floors carried scratches in patterns that looked like history rather than neglect. A low couch, slightly sagged at the middle, sat across from an old wooden coffee table with faint rings marking where cups had once rested. Books, hundreds, occupied every surface that could bear weight. Shelves, side tables, stacks on the floor, arranged in the kind of disorder that made sense only to the person who lived with it. Isabella's eyes burned. She chose all this? She asked. She fought over the paint color, the Tycoon said quietly, closing the door behind them. Over the rug. Over whether the plants were getting enough light. His fingers brushed the back of a chair as he passed it. She said if she was going to have one place that didn't belong to them, it had to feel like herself. Isabella stepped farther in, fingers trailing over the spines of books. Titles flickered by under her touch. Law, economics, political history, poetry. Recipes annotated with looping handwriting. On the windowsill, a plant with broad green leaves reached stubbornly toward the glass, still alive despite the sense that no one had watered it in too long. Whoever came here now, they came quietly, gently. Her throat tightened. You kept this exactly the same. I couldn't bring myself to dismantle it, he admitted. At first I told myself it was strategic, a place off the grid. After a while I had to admit it was something else. He glanced around, eyes shadowed. Guilt is a terrible interior decorator, but it kept the lights on. She turned to him. What happened here between you and her? She asked. The last time, he took a long breath as if pulling the memory up from somewhere heavy. She'd found evidence, he said. Early drafts of the contracts, notes between attorneys, proof that my family knew what they were doing was illegal. She wanted to go public, media, regulators, courts. She asked me to stand beside her when she did it, and you said no. Isabella murmured. I said not yet, he corrected, bitterness curling around the words. I said we could fix it quietly, inside the walls, without bringing the whole structure down. I was young, loyal, afraid. She looked at me like she was watching a bridge collapse in slow motion. His jaw flexed. 2 days later, she disappeared. So did the evidence. So did this pendant. Isabella reached for the necklace almost reflexively. The pendant was warm, as if reacting to the room. She never told me, she whispered, about any of this. She just said some doors, once opened, never closed properly again. I thought she was talking about heartbreak. Maybe she was, he said. Some of those doors were in me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt layered, thick with unsaid apologies. With years of distance, neither of them could repay to the dead woman who'd tried to warn them in different ways. Finally, Isabella sat on the couch, the cushion dipping under her weight. The necklace lay like a small sun against her skin. You said there's something inside, she said, that it's more than just jewelry. Everything's already changed. She replied softly. Show me how much. He nodded toward the coffee table. Here, it should rest on something that's hers. Mateo drifted toward the window again, eyes on the street, leaving them inside a quiet circle defined by lamplight and memory. Isabella unclasped the chain and let the pendant fall into her palm. Up close, she could see every tiny scratch, every softened edge. She remembered her grandmother's hands moving over it absent-mindedly while they watched soap operas, over dishes, over bills spread on the table. Each touch had been another layer of intention she'd never thought to question. Her thumb found the faint seam along the side, the one she'd only recently noticed. Her pulse climbed into her throat. What if there's nothing in it? She said suddenly. What if we open it and it's empty and everything you're saying is just an old story clinging to metal? Then we mourn a possibility, he said quietly. And we walk away knowing we at least looked. But you and I both know she wasn't sentimental without purpose. She weaponized sentiment. If she turned this into a symbol, it's because she needed a symbol that could survive her. The description knocked something loose inside her. Yes, that was Maria, turning small, ordinary things into anchors. A ceramic mug that meant courage. A folded grocery receipt that meant a month survived. A necklace that now felt like a loaded gun made of memory. Isabella pressed gently against the seam. At first nothing happened. Then, faint as a sigh, a tiny internal click vibrated against her skin. The knock sounded like courtesy, but the timing was surgical. 3 soft taps against the blue door, too measured to be a neighbor, too assured to be lost. Isabella felt it all the way down her spine. The apartment. Books, plants, the ghost rug of her grandmother's steps. Held its breath around them. Mr. Vega, Ms. Ruiz. A man's voice called, calm through the wood. We'd really prefer to discuss this like civilized people. Hearing her surname from the other side of a door no one was supposed to know rattled something deep inside her. Her fingers flew to the pendant instinctively, pressing the warmed gold flat against her chest. Across from her, Vega straightened, his movements smoothing into a kind of poised stillness she recognized now as his armor. Whatever softness she'd glimpsed earlier retreated behind lines she suspected boardrooms knew very well. Mateo was already moving. Silent, deliberate, he crossed to the door, stopping just short, posture tense but not reckless. He leaned toward the peephole, one hand braced gently on the frame. Isabella watched his shoulders, searching for the smallest twitch. The room seemed to narrow around that circle of glass. 2 men, he murmured after a moment. Late 50s, late 20s. Suits, good ones. No uniforms, no visible weapons. The older ones too relaxed. The youngers pretending not to stare at the door. Vega didn't approach, but his presence thickened. They came fast, he said. Faster than they should have been able to, unless someone inside my world gave them a shortcut. His gaze flicked unconsciously over the apartment as if checking for ghosts. Of course they did. The voice came again, unwavering. We're not here to make this unpleasant, it said, almost gentle. But it will become complicated if we keep talking through a door. May we come in, Mr. Vega? Isabella's pulse pounded in her ears. They know you're here, she whispered. They always know where I am, he replied quietly. That's how I've managed to stay useful this long. Then, louder, you're not invited anywhere, Harold. You're trespassing on history you tried to erase. The name hung in the air. Harold. The man on the other side chuckled softly, like someone indulging an old friend. History has a way of visiting unannounced, he replied. You know that as well as I do. At least let us do this in chairs rather than corridors. Mateo looked back, waiting. Vega held his gaze for a long beat. A dozen calculations passed silently between them. The risk of opening the door versus the danger of letting powerful men linger in hallways long enough to call for less polite backup. Finally, Vega nodded once, short and begrudging. Chain stays on, he said. We see their faces before we decide if they get to see ours. Metal rattled softly as Mateo slid the security chain into place. The door opened a careful 3 inches. Hall light spilled in, flattening the colors inside the apartment. Through the gap, Isabella saw a slice of an older man's profile. Silver hair, lined face, eyes that took everything in without seeming to move. Beside him, the edge of a younger man's shoulder, rigid in a too neat suit. Evening, the older man said, tilting his head toward the narrow opening. Harold Price. I speak on behalf of several very concerned parties. They'd appreciate if this evening didn't turn into a spectacle. Mateo didn't smile. If they didn't want spectacle, he said calmly, they shouldn't have sent goons to stalk a woman out of a restaurant. Harold's gaze slid past him toward the room. I'd prefer to speak directly, he said. We both know I won't go away just because the door is stubborn. He paused. And you know I won't involve the police. That wouldn't benefit anyone. Vega let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. He's right, he said, more to Isabella than to Mateo. If we keep him in the hallway, he'll just grow roots. Open it. Let the rot sit where I can see it. The chain came off. The door swung wider. Harold Price stepped inside with the careful respect of someone entering a church he didn't quite believe in. His eyes moved once around the room, over the couch, the plants, the book towers, the rug. Recognition flashed, quick and sharp, before he buried it. The younger man followed, clutching a leather folder like it was a flotation device, gaze skittering away from direct contact with anyone's eyes. Still the same, Harold murmured. She'd be pleased. He turned toward Vega. You kept this place better than you kept your distance. Don't pretend you're sentimental about her now. Vega said. You signed half the papers that buried her. Harold absorbed the hit without flinching. I'm here to stop anyone else from being buried, he replied. Then his attention shifted at last to Isabella. Their eyes met. His were a calm, cool gray, the color of expensive stone. He didn't sneer, didn't soften. He studied her with a clinical curiosity, like someone assessing whether a crack in a wall was cosmetic or structural. His gaze stopped at the chain around her neck. Ms. Ruiz, he said, you've had quite a night. She hated that he said it like small talk. That depends on what you call quite, she answered. I call it being escorted out of a restaurant followed by strangers and visited by men who know my name but haven't had the decency to explain why. Something like approval flickered in his eyes. Direct, he said. Good. Direct is useful. He took a measured step toward the center of the room, nowhere near close enough to touch her, but close enough that the distance suddenly felt charged. I do apologize for Mrs. Halden's theatrics. Old guilt doesn't age well, it ferments. Isabella's jaw tightened. She accused me of wearing stolen jewelry. Harold's gaze dropped to the pendant again. She recognized an old problem, he said, and reacted badly. That's why I'm here, to turn a bad reaction into something more manageable. Mateo snorted. Vega said nothing. And what exactly is the problem? Isabella asked. My necklace? My grandmother? Me? Harold considered her for a moment, then answered with disarming frankness. All three, he said. Combined, they present a scenario my clients would strongly prefer to contain. You are not dangerous in yourself, Ms. Ruiz, but certain symbols, in the wrong hands and the wrong rooms, can ignite things no one can control. Her hand closed around the pendant again, thumb pressing into the familiar curve. This is not a symbol, she said. This is my grandmother's. It's both, Harold replied gently, and that's why we're all very nervous. Vega stepped closer now, placing himself between them without blocking her view. Get to the point, he said. This isn't a seminar. Harold inclined his head slightly. Of course. He clasped his hands loosely in front of him, the gesture almost priestly. You have something my clients believed was destroyed many years ago. The fact that it exists, and that you exist, creates legal and reputational risks of breathtaking size, the kind that make people irrational. My presence here is their attempt at rationality. Isabella held his gaze. So they sent you to... What? Buy me? A small, tired smile touched his lips. To talk first, he said. Then perhaps to buy time. He glanced at Vega. And to see how much of your conscience he's finally decided to excavate. The air in the room shifted, tension layering over history. Isabella felt the tremor in her hands and forced them still against her knees. For the first time in her life, every eye in the room, Vega's, Mateo's, Harold's, was waiting to see not what would happen to her, but what she would choose. And she realized, with a start that felt like a ledge under her feet, the next move was hers. The room felt suspended between heartbeats, every person anchored to the weight of the next silence. Isabella drew in a slow breath, not because she felt calm, but because someone needed to steady the air. And the men circling her certainly wouldn't. What is it you want me to do? She finally asked. Her voice didn't tremble. She surprised even herself. Harold seemed almost relieved by the question. We want discretion, he said. You walk away. You live your life. You keep the necklace if that matters to you. Just keep it quiet. In return, we make sure no one bothers you again. Ever. Quiet, she repeated, tasting the word. Meaning invisible. No, he said gently. Meaning safe. Safe. A word she'd never associated with powerful men in tailored suits. But behind her, Vega stiffened slightly. Almost imperceptible, except she had learned in these last hours, to read him the way one reads storm clouds. Something in Harold's offer unsettled him. Not because it was dishonest, but because it was familiar. "What aren't you saying?" she asked, eyes shifting to Vega. He met her gaze. There was no armor now, no charm, just a man standing in the ruins of a past he thought he'd buried deeply enough to outlive him. "They don't want you quiet," Vega said. "They want you erased. Erased politely, gently, with money and signatures and soft words. But erased all the same." Harold sighed. "You always had a talent for melodrama." "Don't," Vega warned, voice low. "Not with her." Isabella's fingers tightened around the pendant, the metal warm as breath. She stepped closer, not to Harold or Vega, but into the open space between them, the space that seemed suddenly hers to command. "Tell me the truth," she said to Harold. "Not the legal version, not the corporate version. The real one." Harold hesitated, just for a second. Then he spoke. "That necklace marks lineage," he said quietly. "A specific one. A bloodline attached to decisions that built fortunes and ruined families. If word spreads that the rightful heir might not be the people everyone believes," he exhaled through his nose, "the world doesn't shift gently. It tears." Isabella blinked. "So I'm... what? Some secret heir? You're the possibility of one," Harold answered. "That alone is dangerous." Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. "And the people who want this... contained? They're afraid I'll claim something. They're afraid you'll exist loudly," Harold said. "That's enough." A strange calm settled over her. She'd spent her whole life trying not to take up too much space. Too loud in classrooms, too visible in lobbies, too noticeable in rooms that preferred her silent. Now powerful men trembled because of her existence. Her existence. She turned to Vega. "And you?" she asked softly. "What do you want me to do?" His throat worked once, like the answer cost him something. "I want you to choose for yourself," he said. "Not for them. Not for me. For you." Her eyes burned, not with fear, but with clarity. She looked at Harold. "I'm not walking away," she said. The younger man flinched. Harold didn't. "I figured," he murmured. "I won't go public," she added. "I won't destroy lives. I won't start wars. But I won't disappear. You don't get to erase me." Harold studied her as if memorizing the moment. Then he nodded once, deeply. "Not defeat, but acknowledgement. Then we negotiate differently." "What does that mean?" Mateo asked. "It means," Harold said, adjusting his cuffs, "Ms. Ruiz has just declared herself someone we must treat as a party." "Not a problem." He turned toward her with something startlingly close to respect. "Welcome to the table," he said. Isabella didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stood there, pendant glinting softly against her skin. A quiet declaration that the girl removed from a VIP section hours earlier now stood at the threshold of a world far larger and far more dangerous than any of them had planned. And for the first time she felt it. She wasn't afraid. She was awake.